My son-in-law said I wouldn't last the year. He said it to my daughter in the hallway of my own home. I was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a glass of water. There were only a few steps between us. He did not see me. I did not move. I heard every word. He wasn't just counting how many years I had left. He was putting a price on my house while I was still living in it. The only thing he didn't know was that I was still listening. If someone has ever calculated how many years you have left before you've even finished living your life, believe me, it is never for your benefit. These stories aren't for everyone. Those who have lived them know. It was a Sunday in October. Scottsdale in October is still warm. Dry air, late sun, the desert going gold at the edges. My wife Miriam and I had hosted dinner. Our daughter Claire and her husband Marcus had driven up from Tempe. Our son Dennis had called in from Denver, which is what Dennis does when things are complicated. He calls instead of appearing, which is its own kind of honesty. Dinner was unremarkable. Marcus talked about a development project. Claire talked about her school district budget. Miriam made the roast the way she's made it for 44 years, which is to say she made it the right way. After dinner I went to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The hallway between the dining room and the kitchen is narrow. 10 feet, 2 framed photographs of the Grand Canyon, a small table with Miriam's keys on it. I had gotten as far as the kitchen doorway when I heard Marcus's voice from the dining room. Low, certain. The voice he uses when he's summarizing something he's already decided. Claire, look, I know it's hard to hear, but your mother's health is a real concern, and your father, honestly, he won't last the year anyway. We should be thinking about next steps. For both of them. Silence. Marcus, don't say that, Claire said. I'm not being cruel, I'm being practical. That property is sitting on a lot that's worth over $1 million. You know what a developer could do with that lot. We should be thinking about this. Another silence. Not tonight, Claire said. Then when? I stood in the kitchen doorway. I had not turned on the light. My hand was on the glass. The water was cold. I stood there for another 30 seconds. Then I went back to the dining room and sat down. Everything all right? Miriam asked. Fine, I said. Just getting water. I did not tell her that night. I needed to understand what I was dealing with first. But I lay awake, not thinking about Marcus. I had already started thinking about Marcus. That was a problem I knew how to approach. I lay awake thinking about Claire, because if I was wrong about her, if she already knew, if she had agreed to this, then the whole system failed. Then the person I needed to trust most was part of what I was building against. I lay there for a long time working through that. By 3 in the morning, I had decided, she didn't know. I had watched her face during dinner. I had watched her respond to Marcus in the hallway. Don't say that. Those 3 words were not the words of a woman who had agreed to a plan. They were the words of a woman being asked to accept something she hadn't fully chosen. That was the first decision I made. Claire was not the problem. Claire was someone who needed to be protected too, just differently. My name is Howard Steele, 72 years old, retired aerospace engineer. I spent 31 years with a defense contractor, working on guidance systems for orbital insertion vehicles, the technology that tells a spacecraft exactly where it is and exactly where it needs to go. It requires a specific kind of thinking. You solve problems where being wrong has consequences measured not in dollars, but in whether something comes back at all. You develop habits of mind that don't leave you when you retire. You learn to separate signal from noise. You learn that most people who are wrong about something haven't looked at the full system. They've looked at the component they're concerned about and assumed the rest will cooperate. Marcus looked at one component, a 72-year-old man and a valuable lot. He didn't look at the full system. We moved to Scottsdale 4 years ago. We bought a house in the Arcadia neighborhood. Mature citrus trees, good soil, a view of Camelback Mountain from the back porch. The lot is nearly an acre and worth over $1 million, not because of the house but because the neighborhood has been attracting development interest for 15 years. We've been approached twice by agents asking if we'd sell. We've said no both times. Marcus runs a real estate development company in Tempe. He knows exactly what that lot is worth. What I would learn later, only after I began asking questions through Leo, was that Marcus had been having a difficult year. His company had a large parcel in Chandler that had stalled in permitting for 18 months. He had taken on a partner to absorb costs. The timeline had slipped twice. He needed a successful transaction to restore confidence with his investors. I don't tell you this to soften what he did. I tell you because it explains the urgency. He wasn't just opportunistic. He was under pressure. The calculation wasn't abstract. It was financial. And financial pressure makes men move faster than they should. That Sunday in October, I understood for the first time what he planned to do with that knowledge. Miriam has been my wife for 44 years. She is 69, a retired librarian, and a person of remarkable precision, about documents, about detail, about what matters and what doesn't. She was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 9 years ago, and manages it with the same diligence she brings to everything she takes seriously. Her doctor has called her most compliant patient 6 years running, but diabetes in Marcus's framing had become something else, a narrative device, a way of establishing that Miriam was fragile, a way of casting us as a unit, as a problem that required a solution. His solution, I would come to understand, was for our home, and its lot to become available. The morning after the dinner, I looked at Miriam at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, glasses perched reading, entirely at peace, and I understood something clearly. He had counted her years too, and he had done it while sitting at our table, eating our food. If you've ever watched someone reduce a person you love to a line in a spreadsheet, keep listening, because this story doesn't end the way Marcus planned. I did not react immediately. In aerospace, when you receive an anomalous reading, the first rule is do not act on a single data point. You verify. You look for corroborating signals. You build a picture before you move. So I watched. Over the 3 weeks after October, I began noticing things I hadn't attended to carefully enough before. Marcus called Claire more than usual. Claire began mentioning, casually, things Marcus had raised, the house being a lot to maintain, whether we had thought about the future, whether we wanted to discuss options. These phrases appeared in Claire's mouth with a regularity that suggested they had been placed there. Marcus had also begun asking, during visits, specific questions about the property. How old is the HVAC system? When did we last have the roof assessed? These are innocent questions if you're interested in a house. They are different questions if you're interested in a lot. And at dinner, Marcus had a habit of steering conversation toward our health. Not cruelly, gently. The gentleness of a man who is keeping a running inventory. You look tired, Howard. Miriam, are you sleeping okay? You know we work with an estate planner. He says it's never too early to set things up properly. An estate planner. A name I hadn't heard before. A professional I had not engaged. I wrote it down. I had opened a new notebook, a plain green legal pad, I kept in my desk drawer, and begun recording every relevant observation with the precision of a technical log. Date, time, attendees, exact language, where remembered, context. By the end of October, the notebook had 8 pages. Marcus did not know that I had spent 31 years in a field where information is the difference between a successful mission and a catastrophic one. He did not know that I kept records the way Miriam keeps her calendar, methodically, completely, with dates and times and exact language. He did not know that within 2 weeks of that Sunday in October, I had already called my attorney. Leo has practiced estate and elder law in Scottsdale for over 20 years. He is methodical and unhurried in a way I recognized from the best engineers I ever worked with. I told him what I had heard. I told him about the estate planner Marcus had mentioned. I told him about the questions about the HVAC system, the roof, the options. Leo listened without interrupting. Howard, he said, do you have existing estate documents? Will trust, advance directive, medical power of attorney, all executed 2 years ago, I said. And who holds the medical POA? Miriam, with Dennis as secondary. Claire is not on it, Good, he said. Keep it that way for now. Continue what you're doing. The notebook, the dates, the exact language. That's going to matter. I already knew it was going to matter. That's why I'd started it. Nia's ##. Chapter 6: The Financial Advisor. And what Leo said. On the third week of November, I received an email from a financial advisor. The email said he had been in conversation with Marcus Ashfield regarding comprehensive estate and financial planning for the Steele family, and wanted to schedule an introductory call to discuss transition strategies and asset protection. I had not authorized Marcus to contact anyone on my behalf. I had not authorized any conversation about my assets or estate. I forwarded the email to Leo within 20 minutes. Leo replied within the hour. Don't respond yet. I'm going to find out who this man works with, and what his relationship to your son-in-law is. This is significant. It was significant. Leo discovered through professional channels that the financial advisor had worked with Marcus on 2 previous real estate transactions, specifically on estate matters related to elderly sellers whose families were involved in the sale process. His practice model was oriented towards situations where family members were facilitating the transition of assets from older owners. He's not coming to help you, Leo said. He's coming to help Marcus help himself. Then Leo said something I want you to hear clearly. Howard, he said, I need you to understand what the actual risk is here. This isn't just about selling a house. If Marcus decides to frame your situation as a capacity concern, if he pursues that angle, he could petition the court for guardianship. He doesn't need your agreement. He needs a sympathetic filing and a willing physician. I sat with that. He could ask a court to decide whether I'm competent, I said. Yes, Leo said. And if a judge agreed, you wouldn't control your own bank account. You wouldn't control the property. You wouldn't control your own medical decisions. Someone else would make those calls on your behalf. Possibly him. And once that petition is filed, Leo said, the burden shifts to you to prove you're competent, not him to prove you're not, which is why I want documentation of your functioning before this goes any further. Leo said. I wrote it down. Date November 21st. Financial advisor email received. Marcus had contacted a financial planner about my estate without my authorization. Leo has confirmed prior relationship. Leo has advised guardianship petition is a real risk. 24 pages. 2 days later, something happened that confirmed Leo was right about the urgency. My neighbor knocked on the door. Dennis flew in from Denver in December. I showed him the notebook. I told him about the hallway, the financial advisor, the questions about the HVAC system. Dennis is 42, careful, and not given to theatrics. He read the notebook pages I showed him, and sat with it quietly. She doesn't know, he said, meaning Claire. She knows something, I said. She doesn't know all of it. Dennis was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? The question was direct and familiar. Dennis had always been good at the right question. I need you to be present, I said. When Marcus makes his move, I want you in the room. He nodded. When do you think he'll move? January or February? He's been building towards something. He's been too careful not to be. On the 4th night, we sat on the back porch until almost midnight. The desert in December goes quiet fast. Stars close, temperature dropping, everything very still. Did you see this coming? Dennis asked. I saw something, I said. Not this specifically. But Marcus has always been a man who accounts for contingencies. I just didn't believe the contingency he was accounting for was us. He picked up his coffee. He has a way of holding a cup, both hands, looking into it, that he's had since he was a boy. He didn't account for you, Dennis said. No, I said. That was the error in the model. We sat a while longer. I want to tell you something, I said. I'm not angry. I've thought about it, and anger isn't the right instrument. Angry people present grievances. Grievances can be dismissed. I need to present facts. Dennis looked at the mountain. Angry people make mistakes, he said. Yes, I said. And I can't afford any. On January 9th, my neighbor across the street knocked on our door. "Did you list your place?" she said. I said we had not. "There was a woman walking your lot last Tuesday," she said. "She had a clipboard, and she was taking photographs. I assumed it was something you'd arranged." I had not arranged anything. Last Tuesday was January 5th. I called Leo. "Someone walked my lot and photographed it, without my authorization," I said. "Do you have a camera at your property line, front and back? Pull the footage." The footage showed a woman with a clipboard, arriving at 10:14 a.m., spending 38 minutes walking the lot, photographing the house, the mature trees, the setback from the street, and the rear property line, the rear boundary line. That's not something you photograph casually. That's something you photograph when you're preparing a file. That's something you photograph when you're preparing to move dirt. I sent it to Leo that afternoon. 2 days later, Leo had identified her through professional contacts. A licensed real estate agent who had prior professional involvement with Marcus Ashfield's company. "He sent an agent to assess your property without your knowledge," Leo said. "Without our consent," I said. "It's uncomfortable. Whether it's actionable depends on what comes next." "What comes next," I said, "is that Marcus is about to ask us to sell." "Yes," Leo said. "I think so too." "Then let's finish getting ready." In the first week of January, before the lot appraisal, before the call from my neighbor, I completed a cognitive evaluation at the Mayo Clinic campus in Phoenix. I had requested it through my doctor. He raised an eyebrow. "You don't present with any concerns, Howard," he said. "I know," I said. "I want a document that says so." The evaluation took 4.5 hours. Memory, attention, processing speed, executive function, abstract reasoning. The report was 38 pages. It concluded that my cognitive functioning placed me in the 94th percentile for adults aged 70-79 in executive function. Planning, sequencing, multi-step reasoning. I also completed the Montreal Cognitive Assessment in my doctor's office. 30 out of 30. "Perfect score," he said. "Add it to my file," I said. "Note the scores prominently." He looked at me for a moment. He has known me long enough to understand that I do not take precautions without reasons. I filed the report with Leo. Marcus called on January 24th and asked if he and Claire could come by on the 28th for dinner. He said Claire wanted to talk about some things. I said of course. I called Dennis. Dennis booked a flight. I called Leo and told him the date. "Do you want me there?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "I want Marcus to commit to his position first. I want him in the room with what he said before I respond." On the night of the 27th, I sat in my study and organized everything. The notebook, the financial advisor email, the security footage still, the cognitive evaluation, Leo's written summary of connections, the text messages Claire had sent me in December that, reading them now with the full picture available, read differently than they had when I received them. I put everything in a manila folder and labeled the tab January 28th. Then I sat with the folder in front of me and thought about what was about to happen. I had thought about anger extensively over 3 months and concluded it was not a useful instrument. Anger changes the shape of evidence. Anger makes a man who should present facts present grievances instead. Grievances can be dismissed. Facts cannot. What I felt, holding that folder at 11 o'clock at night, was clarity. I also thought about Claire. I had not allowed myself to think too specifically about her face when she saw this. There are limits to what you can plan for without feeling the weight of it too early. Claire is my daughter. Whatever Marcus had decided, she was not the calculation. She was the person I had stood beside at her wedding in the particular silence of a man who is very happy and doesn't have the language for it. I put the folder in the left drawer of my desk. Then I went to bed. They arrived at 6:30. Claire looked nervous in the way she has since she was 9. A stillness around the eyes, her hands working slightly. Dennis had arrived 45 minutes earlier, and was sitting in the living room with iced tea when they walked in. Marcus had not expected Dennis, a small shift, barely visible, but I had been watching for it. We ate dinner. The conversation was ordinary. After dinner over coffee, Marcus said, "We wanted to talk about something, and I hope you'll hear us out." I said, "Of course." He presented it as concern: Miriam's health, my age, the size of the house relative to what we needed, the maintenance, the equity you've built up, sitting in a property instead of working for you. He placed a brochure on the table, a continuing care retirement community in North Scottsdale. He had carried it from Tempe. He had prepared for this. He talked about quality of life, about peace of mind, about not wanting to burden anyone. He used the word burden in a way that implied we already were one, or would become one without intervention. At one point he mentioned Miriam's diabetes. He did it carefully, with Miriam's health management being so important, in the way of a man who has thought precisely about how to raise a person's medical situation without appearing to exploit it. Miriam, across the table, did not look at him when he said that. She looked at her coffee cup. I catalogued it. Near the end, Marcus mentioned that he had been doing some preliminary thinking about the property, and had some contacts who would be interested in a private sale, saving us real estate commission. His contacts, our property. He had been thinking about this long enough to have contacts ready. I looked at him across the table for a moment. Then I said, "Marcus, before we respond, I'd like to show you something." I went to my desk and retrieved the folder. I brought it to the dining room table. Dennis shifted his chair slightly to give me room. I placed the folder on the table and opened it. I did not raise my voice. I have never found volume useful in technical situations. What you need is clarity. On October 17th, I said, you told Claire in the hallway of this house that I wouldn't last the year. You said the property is worth over $1 million and that we should be thinking about next steps. I was standing in the kitchen doorway. I heard every word. Marcus's expression did not change the way an innocent man's expression changes. It changed the way a man's expression changes when he understands he has made a miscalculation. He didn't reach for the papers. He didn't deny it. He just recalculated. "Howard, I'm not finished," I said. I placed the financial advisor email on the table and turned it to face him. He didn't pick it up. He read it where it lay. I could see the moment he understood that I had received this email in November and had said nothing, that my silence during those months had not been acceptance. It had been documentation. I received this on November 21st. You had contacted a financial advisor about my estate without my authorization. He has a documented professional history with your company. I placed the security footage still on the table. On January 5th, a licensed agent walked and photographed this property for 38 minutes without our knowledge or invitation. She has a prior professional relationship with you. Claire, who had not been looking at Marcus, looked at him now. I watched his face, not hers. Marcus's jaw had tightened. The expression of a man recalculating in real time, assessing how far back the record went. The answer was September. I also want to show you this, I said. I placed the cognitive evaluation summary on the table. 94th percentile. Executive function. Then the MOCA result. 30 out of 30. I had these done in January, not because I was concerned about my functioning, because I wanted documentation in the event that anyone attempted to suggest otherwise, including a court. The room was very quiet. Miriam, who had not seen the folder before that moment, was sitting perfectly still. She told me later that she had understood, the moment I stood up to retrieve it, what was about to happen. She had decided to say nothing, to let me lay the record down in front of the room the same way I had built it over 3 months. Dennis was looking at his coffee cup. "Marcus," I said, "I have been documenting this situation since October. My attorney has been involved since November. Everything I've shown you is either in his possession or logged with a timestamp." Marcus said. "I was trying to help." "I know," I said. "That's what you were going to say." He looked at me. "The answer is no," I said. "We are not selling. We are not meeting with your financial advisor. We are not discussing the property with your contacts. We are not moving to a continuing care community. Not because we haven't considered our future, we have, but because our future is not a transaction that requires your facilitation. Another silence. Claire, I said. She looked up. I know you weren't behind this. I've known that since October. What I want you to understand is what was being done and why. Not because I want you to feel badly, but because you deserve to know what was being planned around you. She had been looking at the folder, at the security footage, at the email with Marcus's name in it. He said you wouldn't last the year, she said, quietly. Not a question. Yes, I said. She closed her eyes. Marcus began to say something about context, about concern. The words came in the rhythm of a man deploying a rehearsed backup position. Claire turned to look at him. You went behind them, she said. It wasn't a question either. He didn't answer quickly enough. That pause was its own answer. Whatever she had believed about his intentions before that moment, it changed in that pause. I watched it change. She turned back to me. What do you need, Dad? That question. Dennis made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. It was the sound of something landing exactly where it was supposed to. They left before 9. Marcus said very little after the folder. He accepted a glass of water Miriam offered. Miriam, who had sat through the entire confrontation with the quiet of someone storing everything, drank it in 2 swallows and stood. We'll be in touch, he said. It was not an apology. It was the sentence of a man buying time to find his next position. At the door, Claire hugged me. Longer than usual. I felt her hold on a moment past ordinary, and understood she was working through something in real time. Talk soon, I said. After they left, the 3 of us, me, Miriam, Dennis, sat in the living room without turning on any additional lights. Miriam picked up her knitting, set it down without doing anything with it. He had the brochure in the car, she said. He carried it from Tempe. Yes, I said. He thought you'd nod. That was the plan. She was quiet for a moment. Then he sat right there, she said. She looked at the chair at the end of the table where Marcus had been sitting. He sat at this table and ate my food and talked about my health like I was a problem he was solving. She didn't say it with anger. She said it with the particular flatness of a woman who has organized other people's lives long enough to know exactly what it looks like when someone tries to organize hers. Dennis looked up from his phone. You know what the look on his face was, he said. When you put the footage on the table. What? Calibration, Dennis said. Like an instrument reading it wasn't designed to receive. I looked at my son, 31 years of aerospace, I said. And you say a thing like that. He almost smiled. Before I went to bed, I opened the notebook to the last page. January 28th, Marcus presented a plan to facilitate property sale and move to assisted living. Brochure carried from Tempe. Premeditated. Referenced Miriam's health. Referenced private contacts for our property. Folder laid out. Documentation presented. Marcus, I was trying to help. Letter from Leo to follow. Claire, what do you need, Dad? I closed the notebook. Then I wrote one more line. The mission returned. He tried to minimize. That week he sent Claire 3 long messages, arguing that everything he had done was motivated by concern. That the financial advisor had been only an exploratory conversation. That the agent walking the lot was not an official appraisal, and had been purely informational. He used the word proactive extensively. I read the messages once and handed the phone back to Claire. Do you believe him? I said. She was quiet for a long time. I believe he thinks he's right, she said. That's different from being right, I said. She nodded. What she did with that distinction, with Marcus, with their marriage, in the months that followed, was between her and her life. I was not interested in the collapse of my daughter's marriage. I was interested in the protection of my wife and my home. Those things were accomplished. My attorney filed 3 actions. A formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate regarding the agent's unauthorized lot assessment, in coordination with a party who had a direct financial interest. The department opened an inquiry. A formal letter to the financial advisor's compliance office, documenting that he had initiated contact regarding estate planning for a client without that client's authorization. His firm confirmed the referral from Marcus had not been disclosed as required, and closed the engagement. A formal letter to Marcus directly, from my attorney's office, stating clearly that any further contact regarding the Steele family's estate, property, or financial affairs without our explicit written consent would constitute grounds for further legal action. Marcus received the letter on a Tuesday. He did not respond. 4 months later, my attorney told me the department had identified prior properties where Marcus had used the same pattern. 2 other elderly owners, family members involved in the potential sale, agents with prior relationships to his company. No complaints filed, no documentation. Until mine, the prior cases won't be charged, my attorney said. But the department now has a file on him, with your documentation in it, and 2 prior incidents on record. I thought about the corkboard in Marcus's study, the index cards, the photographs of development sites in our neighborhood. He was systematic, I said. Yes, Leo said. So were you. I told Miriam everything on February 2nd. 5 days after the dinner, I sat with her at the kitchen table with the folder open between us. The same table where Marcus had placed the brochure. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet. He counted our years, she said. Yes. And you'd been building this since October. Yes. She looked at the notebook pages, at the cognitive evaluation, at the work I had done quietly, over 3 months to protect us. You didn't tell me, she said. I didn't want to worry you until I knew what we were dealing with. She was quiet. Miriam, if I was wrong to do it that way, you weren't wrong, she said. You were being an engineer. She said it the way she has said it for 44 years, not as criticism, but as exact classification. You needed to verify before you moved. Yes. She closed the folder. She looked at Camelback Mountain, through the back window. Is the property still in our name? She said. Always was, I said. Good. She picked up her coffee. I'm going to start locking the gate. Dennis came back in March. He helped me build a proper gate latch for the rear access to the lot, something I'd been meaning to do for 2 years. We worked on it for a Saturday morning with the particular quality of work done alongside someone whose company requires no maintenance. Afterward, we sat on the back porch. Are you and Claire okay? He said. We talked more than before. Something happened to the formality. She was used, he said. Yes, and she knows it. What she does with that knowledge is her work to do. We sat for a while. Marcus isn't going to stop permanently. Dennis said. Men like that find a new angle. He's welcome to, I said. He knows what I'm capable of now. That changes his calculation. Dennis thought about that. He said you wouldn't last the year, he said. He miscalculated, I said. That happens when you don't have enough information about the system you're dealing with. He looked at the mountain. 31 years in aerospace, he said. 31 years, I said. You learn to document everything. You learn to verify. You learn that the moment someone calls a mission routine is the moment you start paying closest attention. He finished his coffee. He had no idea, Dennis said. No, I said. He saw a 72-year-old man, and a valuable lot. He saw a transaction. I looked at the gate latch we had just installed. He forgot to check the tolerances. I have thought about what Marcus believed. I think he believed what people believe when they look at someone my age and see the final chapter, rather than a person still inside the story. He saw a man and a woman in their 70s, a valuable property, a wife with health considerations, and he calculated, patiently, over what I now believe was more than a year, that the path from where he stood to that property ran through a quiet, managed transition. He was not wrong that such paths exist. He was wrong about who he was dealing with. I have the notebook. I have the report. I have the gate with the new latch. And I have this. On a Sunday in October, I stood in the dark kitchen doorway, holding a glass of water, and I heard every word. I decided that the word anyway was going to be the most expensive word Marcus Ashfield ever spoke. This morning Miriam brought coffee to the back porch, and sat beside me, and we looked at Camelback Mountain. Do you still think about what he said? She asked. Yes, I said. But not the way I did at first. How now? He gave me a data point, I said. I used it. She was quiet. He said, you wouldn't last the year, she said. He miscalculated, I said. She picked up her coffee. The mountain was exactly where it had always been. The year isn't over, and neither am I. And he knows that now. If this stayed with you, there are others like it here. Stories about trust, about family, and about what happens when someone counts your years before you're done living them. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, and if this hit close to home, leave a comment. I read them.